Hi, I'm Derek Ashong. Welcome to the stream. Today, is the political theater of Hosni Mubarak's trial hurting the credibility of Egypt's justice system? And has the revolution stalled? We'll get an update on the protest movements in Egypt. Our digital producer, Ahmed Shihab Eldin, is here with us as always, looking out for your live feedback. Also joining us on the set today is Khalid Beydoun. He is an attorney and co-founder of the Egyptian American Rule of Law Association. Khalid, welcome to the show. Tell us a little bit about what your organization does.
Well, the Egyptian American Rule of Law Association, EARLA, is a consortium of Egyptian American attorneys, practitioners, lawyers here in the States, who are collectively trying to bring their skill set to Egypt to help promote the rule of law in Egypt at this critical time. I had some of my colleagues in Egypt just a couple of weeks ago working with on-the-ground Egyptian nonprofits, human rights organizations, and also governmental figures to help make that transition a smooth one.
Okay, so it's really good to have you here because we're basically going to be talking about what's happening presently in justice system for Mubarak, but also what's happening with some of the Egyptian people. So thanks a bunch for joining us today. Now, we want to let you know that once again, we have some of our viewers joining us in a Google Plus Hangout today. Let's check them out really quickly and make sure that they can see and hear us okay. We're going to check out here. Maybe you guys can say hi. Can you see us? Google Plus people? They're like, we cannot tell what's going on, no doubt. So anyway, they're going to join us later in the stream post show with their live contributions. As always, we want to know what stories you're following. So send your tweets to us in a tweet with the hashtag AJStream, and you may be featured in a future episode.
Hi, I'm Trisha Wong, and I use social media to listen to the world, and I'm in the stream.
Many Egyptians continued to watch in disbelief as ex-President Hosni Mubarak appeared once again in court to face charges of corruption and ordering the killing of anti-government protesters. What the world saw was an 83-year-old man lying on a hospital stretcher inside a defendant's cage. The event has led many to ask whether the courtroom spectacle may be hurting the legitimacy of Egypt's judiciary. Online, many people are reacting to today's ruling that the trial will no longer be televised, and I actually want to show you a few of the tweets that we've seen on that front. Here from @Odarwaza, Mubarak's trial will no longer be televised. This was all theater to psychologically appease the Egyptian public. And additionally from @MacrosTheBlack, bad ruling by judge in Mubarak trial to stop it being televised. Justice must be done and also must be seen to be done. Egypt deserves that. Joining us now via Skype is Cairo-based journalist Ashraf Khalil, who's been reporting on the events in Egypt and watching the Mubarak trial. Ashraf, welcome to the stream. Thanks so much for joining us. First question, what do you think of this recent ruling by the judge that the trial can no longer be televised?
Well, I don't think it's necessarily terrible. I mean, people are going to be upset that they won't be seeing this on television, but I think the reasoning, the judges really the key thing from this point on is how they handle the journalists and the journalistic coverage of the trial. As long as journalists are allowed fair access to the courtroom and are not censored or not hindered in any way, as long as they don't try to play games with who can and cannot get into the courtroom. As you know, Jazeera English and Arabic has yet to be allowed into that courtroom. If they play fair with that part, then I'm okay with the fact that it's not on television every day.
Now, I'm curious about the perception on the ground about the fairness of the trial because we don't know that all of the former regime people have been transitioned out of power. So is there a concern that the judiciary may actually be biased in Mubarak's favor?
There is certainly reason for concern about the independence of the judiciary. However, it's worth noting that even in the worst days of the Mubarak regime, the judicial branch was pretty much the least corrupt element. That there were judges they controlled, but there really were judges that they could not control. That's why they had to invent the state security courts. That's why they sent people to military tribunals, civilians to military tribunals, because they couldn't count on controlling the verdicts of judges.
Now, let's get your thoughts on this.
Always had an independent streak.
I want to get Khalid's thoughts on this for a moment because we've actually, first of all, we've seen that the Mubarak is getting civilian trial, but some civilians are actually being given military trials. So what exactly is happening with the judicial system there?
Yeah, I mean, there's a clear double standard that, civilians and, citizens of the country are being treated a certain way, but an individual who's been dictator for 3 decades, 30 years, is receiving, preferential treatment or special treatment. And that sets,
And he's a military man.
Exactly, and he's a military individual with, a long, extensive military history.
Yeah.
So the fear that the judicial process is biased, given that he's appointed these individuals, I think is a strong belief. But I think the more critical kind of concern is the fact that there's kind of a double standard being created in an asymmetrical legal landscape that is just setting a bad foundation for the country moving forward.
Ashraf, usually we put questions from our community to our guests, but there's an interesting tweet from you earlier today saying, "Glad to see the judge finally starting to crack the whip on the lawyer circus." Now, is this because you think the political theater is really undermining the credibility of the judiciary, and this is just more Mubarak era politics? Why'd you tweet that?
Yeah, that to me was the worst thing about what was going on. Was you had this mob of lawyers like fighting for television time, fighting for microphone time. It was bad. It looked bad, and it was disruptive. And it was this, So today the judge really kind of almost shouted them down. I mean, I was applauding when he did that, frankly, because it was just I don't know what the standards were for what lawyers got to get in there, but it seemed like there was no standard. It seemed like anybody with a lawyer syndicate card could get in and try to get some TV time. It was bad.
Now, we know that he's being charged with corruption and also with the death of 850 protesters. Are there any issues that maybe are not being addressed in this trial that should be?
Well, I mean, corruption, violence against, corruption, and obviously you're looking at specifically the violence that took place regarding the revolution, but you have a 10 to 15 year history. You could make a case that he fostered and permitted a culture of absolute lawlessness among the Interior Ministry, in which case anyone who was ever tortured or killed in police custody, and that's a big file, would be on his head as well. You can make that case.
Now, Khalid, Ashraf has said that the judiciary is relatively independent, but you're looking at a country that's in a major state of transition. How likely is it, or how strong is the Egyptian judiciary in its ability to withstand this transition and give justice?
Well, it's going to be difficult. I mean, what we're seeing now is unprecedented. It's very much kind of a prototype where you're having, a former leader, standing for trial and so forth. So there's going to be a lot of flaws. It's not going to be a fluid process. And the fact, again, that he's appointed these individuals who are conducting the process, it's not going to make it a neutral one. Here in the United States, we're used to a relatively kind of fluid and transparent process because we're used to seeing prominent individuals and leaders, politicians and mayors. Being from Detroit, we saw Kwame Kilpatrick, the mayor of the city, exactly, who's charismatic, larger-than-life kind of guy, stand for trial. But again, this is very much kind of a prototype, first-time model or experience that we're seeing in Egypt. So there's going to be a lot of flaws, a lot of glitches.
Absolutely.
Ashraf, we have a tweet from Gail Masengi saying that it's the same judges and the same military rulers that worked with Mubarak for a long time. So he's saying not to expect a fair trial. And we saw that, when the former Interior Ministry, Habib al-Adli, was there, he was shaking hands with the military rulers, and those photos were tweeted. We talked about them on our program. Do you think that that's really indicative of the fact that it's not a fair trial, or just simply the fact that they used to work together and they can still have a fair trial?
Well, no. Okay, I realize that there's going to be a natural tendency to assume that anyone who is a judge under Mubarak is going to be in Mubarak's pocket. And I actually don't know the personal history of the lead judge here. But I do know that under Mubarak, there was a very strong independent streak throughout the judiciary. In 2005, you had the closest thing to a fair election in the 2005 parliamentary elections because you had judges in the polling places. So the only thing, they couldn't stuff the ballot boxes with judges there. So what the security forces did was set up camp 2 blocks away and prevent anyone they didn't like getting near the polling station.
So Ashraf, are you saying that you are expecting then that this could be a fair process? Well, I mean, what's your expectation for this trial?
It could. I wouldn't go beyond the word could. It won't definitely be a fair process, but the judges have a history of having their own minds and their own independent streaks. They have embarrassed the government and gone against the government in the past. That's the whole reason they created state security courts, was because they couldn't trust the mainstream judiciary to do what they wanted.
Ashraf, thank you very much for giving us your feedback from on the ground about this a really critical issue. We appreciate it.
No problem. Thanks.
Now, you can read more about the Mubarak trial on the main Al Jazeera website, english.aljazeera.net. There you're going to find more opinions, analysis, as well as a live blog of the day's events.
Now, speaking of Mubarak, the hashtag Mubartek has also emerged on Twitter. Mubartek's basically a play on words using the last name of Egypt's ex-president, Mubarak, and BART, which is the acronym for San Francisco's local transit provider. Now, last week, BART disabled mobile phone services to prevent a planned protest against the company on Thursday. This attracted, of course, as one might expect, comparisons to similar crackdowns of dissent and protest movements across the Arab world. Now, here's one tweet making the correlation from Not Hosni Mubarak saying, "Fascinating how they pulled a Mubarak is actually a thing now. Arab pop culture has gone international." And then more directly, EFF tweeting saying, "BART pulls a Mubarak in San Francisco, turns off cell phone service to stations to disrupt protests." Now, demonstrators in Northern California's Bay Area planned a protest to condemn the shooting of Charles Hill. He was a man who was killed by a BART police officer on July 3rd. We're going to show you this video right here. This is the police officer from CCTV getting ready to shoot the gentleman that I just described. Now, we also have some footage that we want to show you. You can see right here he grabs his gun. We also want to show you some footage from the actual protest movement on July 7th that we just described. As you can see, they're swarming right here, the BART station, making it difficult for police to do their job in controlling the protests. And now the hacktivist group Anonymous has also launched a cyber attack on the BART website and has posted company contact information for more than 2,000 customers. Now, we spoke to those who claim to be members of Anonymous to discuss what they're calling Operation BART. And in a video message titled Operation BART, they announced, "Today we've seen America come alive." Now, we're going to play you just a short clip from that video that they released today. Seems that we've lost sound from this computer. It's a shame because in this message, I'm just going to read it for you since we've lost sound. He highlights, the group rather highlights, it says, "Today we've seen America come alive. In the Bay Area, we've seen people gagged, and once more, Anonymous will attempt to show those engaging in censorship what it feels like to be silenced." And you know, they also distributed on Tumblr, which is another blogging platform. They outlined their operation and asked protesters and activists to use this image right here in and around BART stations in order to spread the word of the protests. Now, I don't know if you can see it there, but they've also been creating chat rooms to discuss the matter and come up with what exactly should be the appropriate action. Right here, you see an IRC chat room, and I'm just going to scroll in, Nero Zero right here, summing it up perhaps by saying, "The First Amendment is dying or dead already." And then, of course, there are some who have even used the famous cartoon character Bart Simpson that we all know online to criticize the BART and local authorities' decision to stop cell phone service. Right here in this tweet, you can see it says, "I won't stop cell phone service willy-nilly," and that's Bart Simpson right there drawing it on a chalkboard. But it's also worth noting that on a serious matter, the shooting of Charles Hill marks the third of its kind since 2009 when Oscar Grant, an unarmed black man, was also fatally shot by a white officer. Now, we're going to be talking about Operation BART in more depth later in the post show with our friends on Google+. So you can watch that part of the show on our website using the website address stream.aljazeera.com.
I'm Mangoba Numalu. I'm from Swaziland, Africa, the southern tip of the continent. I'm a journalist. I'm a social media person. I'm part of the stream.
On Friday evening, protesters returned to a very different Tahrir Square, one that was partially blocked by police and military personnel to prevent demonstrations. Some protesters tried to break through the guards, which resulted in brief confrontations. Now, we don't have footage of those confrontations, but we do want to show you some of what's happening on the ground now. This is some footage from Friday, And as you can see, if you look at my screen, there is a phalanx of police officers, and what you can't tell here is that they've actually surrounded the center of Tahrir Square, preventing protesters from entering into the middle of the square. Now, since the military has made it clear that they don't want people congregating in what's effectively the revolution's symbolic home, are activists reconsidering their tactics? And in what other ways are people demanding change? Joining us now from Egypt via Skype is Egyptian video blogger, artist, and activist Sarah Abdulrahman. She's more popularly known online as @SarahsWorld, and she's been among the many protesters in Tahrir Square. Thank you, Sarah, for joining us here in the stream. First off, what exactly is happening on the ground, and how are people responding to the ability, or at least the lack of ability, to enter the center of the square?
I think that the police or the army are very, it's very interesting that they think that once they occupy Tahrir Square that they are, stopping the revolution. And they have been there. If you go there now, if you go there any time of the day, they are occupying the middle, the garden in the middle. They stop anyone from going inside the square. I think that this is their way of saying we're going to stop this revolution. But the revolution is not just in Tahrir Square, and it's not just on the ground. It's in every home. It's in every province in Egypt, and it's not about physically being there.
Now, I think that's an interesting point, that it's not necessarily about physically being there, but there was a symbolic element to the visual of people in Tahrir Square. Some are saying that the revolution is stalled. What's your thought?
Well, I mean, Square is a symbol, of course, to all of us, even though there are a lot of battles that were going on at the same time during the first 18 days and the second sit-in, the one in July. But well, it's very symbolic, and even though to us it means a lot that they're occupying the square right now, but that won't stop us. In terms of the revolution being stalled, I don't think that the revolution is stalled. I think that revolutions have ups and downs. Also, the public opinion isn't always with you, and this is why it's a long process that requires patience.
Now, Sarah, you said it wasn't stalled. We also have Hafsa86 saying it hasn't stalled, but people's focus is being switched from the important issues to the silly soap opera trials. We also have another tweet saying that protesters need to concentrate on forming alternative parties for the elections. Organization is key, then on to demonstrations. And we see a lot of people's anxieties about the situation in Egypt is that, sure, the activists and the protesters have come out in big numbers and demanded change, but now there's a political vacuum. So do you see that that's an issue, and are protesters or activists, moving to the political realm?
Well, I don't know about if all the revolutionaries will run for office or anything like that, but I think that it's very important for all of us to keep monitoring the Supreme Council of Armed Forces. A lot of people are against protesting as a tool for change. But, for example, if someone like me, I can't tweet something just because I'm criticizing the Supreme Council, or I face military trial, and I think that we are actually focusing on freedom of speech, freedom of expression, having actual democracy. Because how can you have a proper, fair, and free election if the Supreme Council doesn't even allow you to say whatever you want? So a lot of people are against protesting, actually, and a lot of people are like, we protested for a while, and now we should really settle down and start rebuilding the country. But I think that these are two completely different angles, and they have different contexts.
Right. Now, Sarah,
what's going on.
There have been some very strong allegations made about the actions of the Supreme Council of Armed Forces, and I want to play a brief video clip, and then I want to ask you a specific question regarding some of the allegations being made here.
ورشية تحت عينه خرج أحمد ابني الكبير محمود اللي أصغر منه. خرج ابني أحمد الكبير ومعاه محمد صاحبه، وخرجوا يجيبوا محمود. قبل ما راحوا عند جامع حمد اتقبض عليهم هما الاثنين في حظر التجول. وما كانش معاهم أي حاجة غير التليفون، وكل واحد فيهم 5 جنيه. خدوهم وبيتوهم معاهم للصبح، وفي الصبح هما بيكتبوا المحاضر كتبوهم كلهم في ميدان التحرير ومنوتوف في ميدان التحرير. قعدنا 27 يوم ندور عليهم لحد ما لقينا اساميهم نازله في جورنال الاخبار، واخدين 5 سنين سجن. هو شرف لينا انه كان ينزل ميدان التحرير بس هو ما نزلش ميدان التحرير.
Now, this mother is making allegations that her sons were unfairly detained and actually sentenced without any kind of transparency. It seems that the sentiment against the Supreme Council of Armed Forces has been reducing, that people have been seeing them as more unpopular. What do you think needs to be done in order to shift the dynamic between the SCAF and the populace?
I think that it's very easy for them to just come out with a decision to say we are stopping military trials for civilians. And since the 28th of January, since basically the first tank went into the streets of Cairo and all of Egypt to basically come within the civilians, they've been taking people, detaining them, and having them face military trials. And there was a very active group called No Military Trials for Civilians that are doing a great job in being there every single day to basically pressure the council to stop these military trials. I have a lot of my friends that have faced military trials. These trials are completely unfair. They just detain people and they say, oh, he was walking around with a weapon, and then they just give them sentences and they basically ruin their futures.
So I want to, Khalid, I want to get your thoughts on this because we mentioned earlier this tweet, which I do have on my screen now, and it says, Sunday, revolutionary at Asma Mahfouz was referred to a military trial. Monday, Mubarak's civilian trial continues. Which part of this makes sense? What do you think is the motivation behind sending civilians to military tribunals and sending a military man to civilian?
Before I address that question, if I could chime in with a quick question, bounce it back to Sarah.
Absolutely.
Sarah, could you characterize on the ground kind of the dynamic between the soldiers and the protesters? Is it tense? Is it hostile? Is it serene or passive? How would you best classify that relationship right now?
Well, first, before July, you would have a conversation with one of the soldiers, and it would be a great conversation, just like you have a conversation with any other Egyptian. And then all of a sudden, they get an order to start beating you, and they just do it. But for some reason, in the past few weeks, they've been particularly brutal, and with also the things that they say, and while they're beating people, and just the way it's just something about it is very monstrous. And I think that a lot of people have been saying these are criminals, these are thugs, you should stop them because they're trying to shake the stability of the country and ruin Egypt's economy. And we're actually, the public opinions being shifted against the revolutionaries through media. And actually the military council members themselves go on TV and they say, the people in Tahrir Square, before the military occupied it, they say these are thugs and these are trying to, ruin the country and stop its economy and things like that.
Sarah, I have a tweet from Muslim American that came in over the weekend saying USAID director in Egypt quits over funding for pro-democracy groups. And we saw that the Supreme Council for Armed Forces came out and criticized the U.S. for funding groups like Kifaya and the April 6th movement. The U.S. was claiming these are non-political groups, and of course the Egyptian army is saying that this violates Egyptian law. So this disputed funding, I mean, what's the role of the U.S.? What's the perception on the ground now?
I think this is actually a particularly funny smear campaign against the revolutionaries, because guess who takes a lot of aid from the United States? That's one. Second of all, I think that it was very interesting for us to see the tear gas canisters that were not only used in January, but also in June 2011 produced from the US. So I think that the US can have a major role in stopping to produce these weapons to disperse protesters. And
Sarah, I'm sorry, we're running out of time. Unfortunately, we're going to ask you to hold that thought. We're going to take it into the post show. Thank you both Sarah and Khalid for joining us. On Tuesday's show, we're talking about divisions in Lebanon over the revolution in Syria. So if you have comments on that, tweet them to us using the hashtag AJStream. In the meantime, this conversation will continue at stream.aljazeera.com. We'll also be coming back to Operation BART and what's going on in San Francisco protest. Stay with us. Tweet us at AJStream. We'll see you online.
there audio coming out of my...
Hey, welcome back. This is the Post Show. We're going to continue this conversation with Egypt, and then we're going to move on to another important topic. Before we come back to our guest, I do want to go back to you, Khalid, about this issue. Because you're a legal scholar, talk to us a little bit about what may be the motivation between sending civilians to military courts and sending a military general to a civilian court in the form of Mubarak himself.
For the latter, military courts tend to be a lot more efficient, a lot more expeditious. So you have a lot of claims from civilians, a lot of claims from protesters, and the ability to the courts to entertain and address every individual trial and come up with a conclusion is quite rapid when compared to a civilian court. The reason why Mubarak is being tried in a civilian court, conversely, is the fact that I think the court sees the symbolic value, the democratic value of trying an individual, a dictator who's a polarizing dictator, largely speaking, been vilified by his people right now. They see the value in giving people access to the process, putting it on television, taking pictures, allocating the images as part of a healing process, but also as a springboard to move forward in a more democratic fashion.
That's interesting. Sarah, I actually would love to get your thoughts in this regard as well. Do you feel that there is a possibility that the Mubarak trial will wind up being a healing factor for the Egyptian people, or do you think that whichever way it goes, it's only going to cause more division?
I think that when Mubarak first saw Mubarak in the trial, I think something happened in all of our hearts. And a lot of people keep asking, do you want execution? What do you want to happen? What do you want to happen to Mubarak? And to me, and to a lot of us, we want just exactly that for every person in Egypt who has done the people wrong to take the just, for his case to take the just course.
Sarah, on Google Plus, we actually have someone, I believe Nick has a question for us, but I just wanted to go to a quick tweet before that. We see Sarah723 saying the military and SCAF are getting way too comfortable in Mubarak's seats. Civilians, thugs, yeah, okay, she says, and I'm Cleopatra. I think what she's highlighting is people are calling for, the cabinet to change, but people are also saying that the cabinet should have more powers. I mean, what should happen in your opinion? And let's actually ignore my question, forgive me. Let's go to Nick for his question. Nick?
Does the Supreme Council of Armed Forces still intend to disallow international observers during the parliamentary election?
Did you get that, Sarah?
Yeah, that they don't want international monitoring.
Yeah, observers during the election.
I think that the Supreme Council, they're very insecure. It's very strange. They act in they're a dictatorship, just like Mubarak. They're a dictatorship, and they wouldn't allow international observers to be there just because. I mean, why? If you're doing something wrong, why would you be scared for anyone to come watch you do it? And I think that citizen journalists should be there, international observers should be there. Everyone should be there. It's a historical moment in our country, and I don't understand why. I mean, I'm one of the people who don't mind international observation at all, actually.
I think one frightening development that hasn't been addressed as of yet is the SCAF has tried to push for this provision in the Constitution to codify that during times of crisis, they take over, which sets a horrible precedent because, generally speaking, it's the SCAF themselves who get to make a subjective determination as to when a time of crisis is. So, if they're unhappy with the way the government's moving, the direction the government's moving in, they can jump in and say, hey, this is a time of crisis, it's time for us to step in.
Well, how is this any different from Egypt's past? I mean, I think I don't want to harp on this Mubarak military thing, but it seems to me it doesn't get discussed enough that this is a person who comes from a military tradition. And, for 50 odd years in Egypt, you've had military rule. So how is the SCAF any different from what we've seen in the past? Or is it just in a different guise?
Exactly. I think it's different in form. You have a collective of individuals trying to entrench their authority and perpetuate the status quo versus, a single individual or an autocrat. But in terms of consequence and in terms of function, you make a great point. They're by and large the same.
Sarah, I want to get another question into you. I'm just curious, as far as the organizing that's happening on the civil society level among activists, what are you doing to prepare for these elections?
think we're more than prepared for the election. We have become very good at citizen journalism, as monitoring the situation, at creating a network between all of us to make sure that to know what is happening, whether it's right or wrong, reporting out there, getting the word out there on what's happening. I think that we've acquired that, and even when communication was cut down, we come up with different ways of doing things. So I'm not worried about that, but I think it's because people are expecting us to run for office. They're expecting the activists to start going into politics, in which, where a lot of people in the civil society are just human rights, making sure that there are no violations.
Okay, so we have, unfortunately, we got to run to our next topic, but thank you, Sara, so much for being with us. We appreciate your time. Take care. And so what we're going to go on to now is something that Ahmed had brought up earlier. It is this issue of OpBart. And this is an operation by Anonymous against the Bay Area Rapid Transit's decision to disable cell phone service in order to thwart protests. These protests are fueled by the shooting of a young man recently, and this is the third over the course of the last 2.5 years. So joining us now via Skype to discuss this further is Jillian York, who's been following the developments on the ground. She's the Director for International Freedom of Expression at the Electronic Frontier Foundation. Jillian, welcome to the stream.
I can.
All right, so Jillian, can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can. Thank you.
All right, wonderful. So tell us, first of all, what happened on the ground today with the Anonymous operation against the BART? What was the impact?
Sure. So what we saw at the end of last night was actually the Anonymous hacked into the mybart.org, I believe, site and managed to release a bunch of different names and passwords related to that website that people had used. And so sort of proving that BART isn't really keeping information secure.
Okay, and so now I know that they also, as Ahmed pointed out, had posters encouraging people to attend the protests. It's not yet time for those protests. They'll happen at, I believe, 5 p.m. Pacific, which will be 8 p.m. Eastern, about 4 hours from now. But has there been any response? Is there a sentiment that people are planning to physically mobilize as well as digitally?
Right. So from what I'm hearing, there are people planning to physically mobilize today. I was actually on the BART the last time this happened, and they managed to block the doors so that the trains couldn't move. And whether or not we think that that's an effective method of protest, the fact is it happened, and it could happen again. And so I think that that's what BART is trying to prepare for. But I think that they made a huge misstep by trying to shut down cell phone communications to prevent that.
Jillian, we have a legion of people on Google+, well, not a legion, several people who want to ask questions, but I have to ask you this question myself. We've seen the UK riots, we've seen BlackBerry, calls on BlackBerry being suspended. We've seen these kinds of steps taken in the Arab world. Now people are joking that, the West is taking cues from the Arabs. Do you think that we're going to be seeing more of this kind of, suppression of online tools in the Western world?
Well, I think that you just gave away my column for the week, but yeah, I think really what we're seeing is internet censorship becoming the norm rather than an anomaly. We are indeed seeing this spread to democracies. Look at what India is doing right now. They've just put new restrictions on intermediaries in terms of what they can host and what kind of content they need to take down. Israel with their anti-boycott law, which definitely affects bloggers and people who comment on blogs. And now we're seeing in the UK and in San Francisco. So I think that these are really worrying developments that do appear to be setting a trend.
And a lot of people said that, this is just a local issue. It's the local police in California. Like, why should this be a national issue, let alone an international issue? Does it have those kinds of ramifications?
Yeah, I think it does. I mean, I think that, I don't know if anything like this has ever been done by a transit provider before. I would think that somebody would have raised that point by now. But essentially, if this is really the first case where a transit provider, a public transportation provider, has shut down cell phone service, in event of a potential protest, then this could indeed have global ramifications because other, governments are always learning from one another when it comes to censorship. And so I think that, we might see more things like this happening.
Great. We have a question from Muhammad, who's in our Google Plus Hangout. Muhammad, you asked a question earlier about the BART story. Please go ahead. Sorry, Muhammad, it seems like we don't have audio. Could you try that again?
Just make sure you're unmuted.
Unmute yourself. the technical
Go ahead,
perils
bro.
of trying new things. Go ahead.
No, we cannot hear
No one
you,
can hear anyone.
unfortunately. So I'm going to ask the Rami and the team back in the control room to just check Mohammed's audio, and when it's cool, if they'll just let us know in our ear that he's ready, and we'll come back to him. Before we do that, Khalid, I do want to draw you into this. I mean, we were just talking about the global implications of these moves to censor people.
Yeah.
What do you think are the implications of the counter movement, where you're seeing it's almost like the blossoming of hacktivist activities in this year?
I think one observation I had when you guys were speaking is you have a lot of, American outfits, organizations like ourselves, the Egyptian American Rule of Law Association. We're seeking to promote the rule of law, elements and provisions like free speech abroad. What these developments with the BART tend to do is it compromises our ability to resonate with individuals in Egypt, other places of the world. If we're setting up, an example that, hey, our basic fundamental civil liberties are being compromised and arbitrarily, put on pause here in the States, then what authority do you have coming to Egypt trying to promote these things?
Right. I think that's a perfect example. It's becoming so stark. Let's see if we can get Mohammed in quickly. Mohammed, go ahead.
I just wanted to ask that I wonder how effective these hacking campaigns can be at getting real social change to occur. And given that they're a legal form of protesting, do you see that? Do you see them being more effective in the future, or maybe effective now?
Jillian?
Sorry, I didn't hear the first word. What type of campaign? I'm sorry.
The hacking campaigns, like Operation BART with Anonymous.
Yeah, so I honestly, I haven't said this, but I have a lot of concerns about those types of campaigns. I mean, I think that distributed denial of service attacks and defacements, the sort of methods commonly used in these cases can also be and are also used against smaller sites, news organizations and independent media providers, et cetera. And so, while, I think there is some sort of effectiveness to those types of, sort of forms of protest, there's also a huge drawback to them becoming commonplace. And so, it's hard to really answer that question without also bringing all of the other concerns into it. But I do think that that sort of Anonymous getting behind some of these things, whether or not it's legal, whether or not it's a positive thing, definitely does bring attention to these causes globally. And I think that that's something that we should be considering in all of this.
Yeah, I think one of the most interesting things about this is oftentimes these issues of police brutality, part of the reason this is even being discussed is because people were capturing footage on their cell phones. And so what happens when something like this happens when you don't have that footage caught, right? And so I think part of what's worth considering as we look at what's happening with BART is the backstory of why it's happening. And a lot of it is because of the ability of people to communicate, which is why I think they're making moves to shut that ability down.
I just quickly want to point out there's a really interesting comic that that was sent to us on the Google chat by Nick Church, but we'll be tweeting that one out because we're running out of time, but it's about the CIA and hackers.
Oh, well, let's take a quick look at it.
Should we? Do we have time? Brilliant.
Let's zoom right in.
If I had the count.
Oh, it's KCD. Nice.
So yeah, exactly. It says hackers briefly took down the website of the CIA yesterday right here on TV. It says what people hear, someone hacked into the computers of the CIA. What computer experts hear, someone tore down a poster hung up by the CIA.
Okay, well said. And on that tip, I think we're going to have to let this go. Jillian, thank you so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Excellent. And thank you to all our team in Google+. We appreciate you too. Take care, you guys. It's been great having you on today. Khalid, thank you very much for your insights on this Egypt topic. And Ahmed, great job as always getting our online community fully involved. We're going to continue to looking out for feedback from you. Tweet us at AJStream to let us know your thoughts on this show and the topics we're going to be covering in the future. Remember, we're looking at Lebanese responses to what's happening in Syria right now. So tweet your thoughts to us at AJStream. They may wind up on the air tomorrow.